If you keep up with the Zelda community online, you've probably noticed that there's a lot of people expressing concerns about the new Legend of Zelda game that comes out in a few weeks, Tears of the Kingdom. If you've noticed that, you've also probably noticed an increasing amount of animosity towards these people for having those concerns. In this video, I wanted to discuss a little bit about why many of the responses to these concerns don't really make sense to me, and where I think these responses are correct and fair. Before we start, just so everyone knows what viewpoint I'm coming from, I'm definitely more on the side of people with worries about Tears of the Kingdom based on the information we have now. But I also think that some people are being kind of ridiculous and very presumptuous about it, considering the information we have or lack thereof. I'm worried simply because I don't have the information yet to quell my concerns, not because I think this game won't address those concerns. That's a very important distinction to make, and it's why I'm not in any way hating on the game because I just don't know yet. None of us do. For me, I'm just going to be worried until we get a trailer that's less vague or the game comes out and I can play it. There's nothing I can do about that. In other words, it's just the fear of the unknown. Okay, so now that you know where I'm coming from, we can get started. One comparison that I've heard brought up to defend the argument that Tears of the Kingdom looks too similar to Breath of the Wild is that it's a direct sequel, so obviously it'll be similar. In my opinion, this is a very fair argument. I don't really think anyone could have been genuinely surprised that the art style and map didn't change substantially after Nintendo announced years ago that Tears of the Kingdom would be a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild. I never expected a change in art style, and I never expected substantial changes to the basic fundamental aspects of the map, meaning the landscape, where towns and stables are located, etc. I don't think you could have logically expected that in a game meant to be a direct sequel, mountains or lakes or towns would just move. That doesn't make any sense. Personally, what I'm expecting and hoping for is the addition of substantial new content within the world. It doesn't bother me if the general landscape of the world stays the same, but I want new settlements and new things to do throughout the map, not just the addition of sky islands above. Those are cool, but they're just totally separate from the surface. I don't believe that adding sky islands will distract us enough from taking issue with the surface not changing much. But again, all of this is just speculation. The idea itself that the surface hasn't changed at all, or not substantially enough to be fun to explore again, is simply that, an idea. Just because Nintendo hasn't shown things in the trailers and gameplay so far for Tears of the Kingdom does not in any way mean that those things don't exist. It just leaves it up in the air and allows people to speculate about whether it does or doesn't. I did want to address a few things though that I don't believe are accurate comparisons when people try to respond to these arguments about the games feeling too similar. One is that Majora's Mask was a direct sequel to Ocarina of Time, and that game was great and substantially different from its predecessor, so we shouldn't be worried about Tears of the Kingdom. For a lot of people, Majora's Mask is their favorite game between the two, and for many, it's their favorite game of all time. The reason this argument doesn't hold water for me is because Majora's Mask feels like an entirely different experience than Ocarina of Time. I've heard people say that Majora's Mask felt the same as Ocarina of Time because the gameplay itself was similar. Of course, they're saying this in an effort to make Majora's Mask and Tears of the Kingdom feel more comparable. But I have to say, I strongly disagree. If you've never played those games, Ocarina of Time takes place in Hyrule. The player spends the entire game as either Child Link or Adult Link. If that's confusing to you, there's a time travel mechanic that's central to the game. However, in Majora's Mask, you transform into multiple different characters throughout the game, and can play as them at will. You play as Child Link, a Deku Scrub, a Goron, a Zora, and as Adult Link when you wear the Fierce Deity mask. All of these transformations come with unique skill sets that never appeared in Ocarina of Time, minus Child and Adult Link. Additionally, the whole map was different. Majora's Mask doesn't take place in Hyrule, it takes place in Termina, which is an entirely different world. These games might mechanically feel similar while specifically playing as Child Link, and some items might appear in both games, but overall, they feel like separate experiences. You could play Majora's Mask without ever playing Ocarina of Time and not be lost at all. I wouldn't even blame anyone for not knowing it was a sequel unless you were specifically told it was. This is just not the case with Tears of the Kingdom. We know already, for sure, that the world will be the same. We have yet to see any substantially different content, minus new abilities that are almost all related to the new crafting system, and Sky Islands, which didn't exist in Breath of the Wild at all. Majora's Mask is clearly much more distinctly different of a game compared to Ocarina of Time than Tears of the Kingdom is to Breath of the Wild. It's worth noting that I don't think either game's approach to creating a sequel is better or worse. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with reusing a world for a direct sequel. But these are just my thoughts as to why comparing Tears of the Kingdom to Majora's Mask is like comparing apples to oranges. Another response I've heard to these worries about Tears of the Kingdom is that all new Zelda games are met with criticism when they try to do something different, and that, over time, the majority of people look back and realize that they were wrong, and the new way was good after all. For example, when Ocarina of Time came out, some people were worried about the new direction the series was going in with making the jump to 3D. Wind Waker tried the more cartoony art style, and at the time, almost everyone hated it. These are things that now, the majority of people agree were great decisions, and most Zelda fans think those games were really good. So to put this idea into perspective in the current environment, lots of people think Tears of the Kingdom will be a glorified sequel, and the argument is that they will be proven wrong in time. This could be the case. It's absolutely possible. But I do think that out of all the Zelda games in the series, Breath of the Wild was the most divisive, even to this day, 6 years later. I think this was inevitable because Breath of the Wild sold more than any other Zelda game. Of course, that means there would be more opposition or critics. But the point still stands that before it came out, and before people played the game through to the end, a lot of people were worried that the world would be empty because it was just too big, or that the game wouldn't be fun without the large, tricky dungeons of the past and a focused storyline to progress through the game. Some people played the game and realized those worries were silly and they loved the game that we got. However, there's still a lot of people out there who agree with their initial worries, 6 years later. I don't think it makes sense to say that just because some past issues in older Zelda games are looked on as better decisions with time, that means this will be the case for Tears of the Kingdom, when more recently with Breath of the Wild, this trend didn't necessarily follow suit. I think the place where the people who are more excited for Tears of the Kingdom and more optimistic about it are correct is that nobody knows what this game will be about. Nobody knows if there will be underwater exploration, or dungeons, or new bosses and mini-bosses, or substantially new content on the surface, or literally anything else. We barely know anything about this game. I implore everyone watching, regardless of which side of the argument you fall on, to go into the game with an open mind. If you go into it thinking it's going to suck, you might just hate it because of that mindset. Because in a way, you want to prove that you were right about it. And conversely, if you go into the game thinking it's going to be the greatest game of all time, and it's just kind of pretty good, you'll be disappointed. Tears of the Kingdom comes out soon. I hope we can all be civil about these discussions in the future and respect where each side is coming from. I'm going to do a playthrough of Tears of the Kingdom on my channel when it comes out, so please subscribe if you want to follow my channel along for that. I'm also doing a playthrough right now of Breath of the Wild leading up to the release of Tears of the Kingdom. If you liked this video, please give it a like, and leave a comment if you have any responses to my thoughts. I really appreciate the support, and I'll be back with more videos soon. Have a good one.